The build-up for Prime Minister Modi's very crucial speech at the UNGA is now happening. We're expecting it to take place any moment now in about 15-20 minutes. Remember, 2 days ago, you saw the Chinese President Xi Jinping. You've seen Donald Trump. They've been having a slanging match at each other. That's what the UN speech was all about. Imran Khan last night doing his own same old antics. But if you measure anything by what India's Prime Minister addressed the UN and therefore a global community in 2019, what did he say? He said, we gave the world Buddha, we didn't give the world war. So you're expecting a statesman-like speech which is going to have honorable mentions to obviously the issues that are impacting us, most of them coming out of China, but also a measure of the resolve that India is putting together to lead a new world order by example, not by bullying or bossing around, as Xi Jinping has been accusing the Americans of doing and the Americans have been accusing him of doing. Let's quickly open up this conversation. On the broadcast with me, I have Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee joining us on the telecast. We also have Sumit Peer on the broadcast with us. Preeti Upala, editor of The Observer out of California, is joining us. And General Dhruv Katoch is also joining us on the telecast. Ambassador Mukherjee, I mean, we are not expecting a Narendra Modi to be speaking in the same sort of tenor that we've heard of Donald Trump or Xi Jinping. It's going to be a more statesman-like speech, no doubt. Ambassador Mukherjee, if you can hear me, we are not expecting the Prime Minister of India to make a similar kind of speech to what Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have made. We're expecting a much more statesman-like approach by Narendra Modi in a short while from now.
Yes.
Yeah, ma'am, go ahead.
With no mention of what Imran said, because we've already covered it in a very good 3 rights of reply. If you notice, the first secretary is from the Northeast, the guy who made the reply.
Yeah.
Which was an excellent choice also.
So, in essence, ma'am, should it now be an example of how India is leading the world in tackling both the economic crisis and the COVID crisis, because we have a large number of daily cases and the economy still requires a lot of work?
Our approach to the UN, actually, right from the beginning of this government, has been for our PM to take the approach that it's multilateral and not bilateral. And so we demonstrate our emerging great power status by showing leadership on all the crises of the world. So I presume that the PM will focus on Corona, because we are also the head of the executive council of the WHO. He will focus on the fact that we have so much to offer because of our strong pharmaceutical company and we are there to help developing countries. He will focus on terrorism and he will focus on the difficulties that countries would face in case anyone tries to take advantage of the pandemic. In other words, an indirect message that pandemic or not, India is well prepared.
Okay, but Ambassador Mukherjee, but Ambassador Mukherjee, you know, every serving diplomat that speaks to us off camera has been indicating, because the question has been, why aren't we being a lot more aggressive? We could have chosen to be a lot more aggressive in the WHO on China, at least put matters to a vote. We have some technical things that we can do as chairman of that council there. We are sitting on the UNSC. There are certain things that we can't push through, but we can certainly use our position to highlight, which we have not been using. Now, the information that I'm getting is, look, the priority right now is to get our behind the scenes, handshake pact sorted out. It's only when this work is done will the more public aggression or public positioning come. Should we be waiting? Why not take on China at the WHO, put a matter to the vote, force other countries to take a position?
First of all, Rishabh, we are joining the Security Council on 1st of Jan next year.
Yeah.
Okay. Secondly, it has never been our policy to show our hand. Okay. So we are waiting till winter sets in, so that, because we are better up, and General Katoch, who has said this many times on your channel, we will brave out the winter. So it's just a question of not blinking until the harsh winter sets in. So then we have till March or April to prepare in case there is a offensive on the ground. So it is in our interest to get the military supplies that we require. We do need some. Our military supplies, shore up our alliances, make sure that we are in good shape. This is not the time for us to go public in the UN, where the General Assembly has got many strange little countries who can be bought off or who can tell tales outside in the corridor. I know I've been in New York myself for 3 years during the height of the Cold War. So it's a very tricky place, Rishabh. This is not the place for us to reveal our hand at all. So I think a statesman-like approach, as you said.
So which is what we're expecting, that the more mature approach from a country like India's versus the immaturity that we're seeing from China. But General Katorj, the truism also is that the Chinese aren't going anywhere. They are not pulling back. It's unlikely now that they will pull back. So technically, they have managed to change the status quo this year. In Corona pandemic, despite all the global talk and build-up, the leadership, in fact, has happened from India. We were the first country to at least take them on in the digital world, take on their apps, etc., etc. But beyond that, there is no comeuppance. The China has not been made to pay a price for anything that they've done this year. Should that still be a concern?
Yes, Rishabh, I think that should be a concern because, in effect, what China has done, both as far as the pandemic is concerned and the aggression which it has shown in the Himalayas, and in the South China Sea, I think so far they have not been made to pay the cost. Now, as you very rightly put out, the first time when somebody really challenged China was when India did it in the Himalayas, in eastern Ladakh, and that took China by surprise. But as far as the pandemic is concerned, I think this is a matter of great concern because let's face it, the whole world has been affected. Everyone in the world knows that China hid the pandemic. When the US president gave his speech in the UNGA, I think just a few days back, he very clearly used the word the China virus. Now, it's a very strong word to use, which indicated liability, that, okay, these people knew what was happening. In fact, the president said that. He said they knew what was happening and they chose to keep quiet. So I think at some point of time, China will have to be made to bear the cost which the world is suffering. Unfortunately, what is happening now is that the vaccine which China proposes to take out, I presume they'll sell to the world and make huge money out of the
No, and they'll use it for leverage. They'll use it for leverage. They're already trying it in Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, that we'll give you the vaccine first. They're doing it with the Turks. And they're going to try it several ways. Whether the vaccine works or doesn't work, can be trusted or doesn't be trusted, doesn't matter. There is also a genuine risk, General Katorj, that the Americans, maybe they are, it's brinkmanship, maybe it's frustration. But as the Americans exit the WHO and get more and more distant with the UN system, that the Chinese simply take over the UN system. The UN has to be saved from Chinese hegemony. How do we do that?
No, in my view, if the US exits from the UN, then there is no UN. I think then the world body per se will collapse. It cannot work if the US stays out. You see, in the same manner, I don't think it can work if China stays out, because that is the way life is. What we really need is to get everybody in, and we need to get 5 more powers in. I mean, I've always been an advocate of having 10 permanent members of the Security Council. And the problem really comes in the veto powers. So now each of them has a veto power. But now I think for a veto to be effective...
But General Katorj, why not force them to show their hand? Bring it to a vote early next year and let the Chinese show their hands and let other countries bring it to a vote in the UNGA, if nothing else. And let the countries show their hand.
I think we are heading towards that because when we come towards the middle of 2021, I think we are going to see dramatic changes all across the world. In some manner or the other, what is happening in the South China Sea is going to pan out, and similarly what is happening in the Himalayas. But I think the time has come when the bully has been called, and the world knows the bully has been called. More importantly, if you see the writings which are coming out from some of the scholars in China and with their writing in the Global Times, I think they are also expressing those concerns.
Well, no, but one is General Katorj to call them out, and one is to make them pay a price. Now, of course, China is not a walkover country, so there have to be a subtlety involved in how the price is to be paid. But there has to be some price paid, otherwise all of it comes down to nothing. Preeti Upala, in the end, there is a genuine risk now that global systems, maybe like the UN, are not only co-opted but taken over with Chinese influence. The WHO has been an example of that, much to the frustration of everyone else in the world. But not a single person has gone to Wuhan to investigate how this virus started. If the Chinese can still pull this off, how do we save the UN from Chinese tentacles?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because it seems like I think these international institutions themselves are under the microscope, and there's a big question mark from the WHO to the Human Rights Commission and also the UN General Assembly and the Security Council itself. China has done a fantastic job of spreading their influence, compromising various countries and institutions, and they do it in a sort of a very subversive way, so it's not very overt. And while the rest of the world is worrying about elections and all sorts of things, China is very peacefully rolling out things like the BRI, the CPEC, and also influencing the top Ivy League schools in America, where that's where the first line of indoctrination begins, academia. And then of course they now have also invested in all these great media houses so that they get the best reporting possible. I think as things escalate, the UN cannot turn a blind eye, so to speak. I suspect in the next several months, this standoff will continue, get worsened, and the US is involved.
But Preeti,
already.
when do we take this, to some logical conclusion? These conversations now have been going on for a very long period of time. In the past 6 months, of course, they've become far more vocal. But in the end, there has to be some logical conclusion. Either the UNSC reform gets put to a vote, or it happens, or one of the sitting powers, whether it's the UK or the French, have to make a call that we no longer belong on the UNSC, and if we do, then India must belong also. Something's got to give.
I absolutely agree with you. As 1/6 of the world's population, I think India deserves to be on that council. It's one of the founding members. And I think if we don't have a seat at the table, then we're on the menu. We've been on the menu for 75 years, Rishabh. I think it's time for us to really put our foot down. And I don't think it would be a case of India coming in to replace another nation. I think it would have to be extended, whether that 5 goes to 10 or 6 or 8 or whatnot. I think it's just going to be you add on some countries.
Or to put it to a vote. So, Sumit Peer,
I don't think 5 countries represent everyone.
Okay, Sumit Peer, you don't have to have read, Clausewitz, Machiavelli or Sun Tzu to know that sometimes you have to strike when the iron is hot. There is a global momentum. Let us not kid ourselves and think the Chinese are naive, incompetent fools that this global momentum will last forever. They will dodge it in every way possible. They will arm twist and bribe in every way possible. If we lose the opportunity now to push for real change, who knows when it will come again?
I think, Rishabh, when you look at the Honorable PM's speech, there are, there are usual things like terrorism, sustainable economic development goals, climate change and others, which we pretty much know. But there are 4 or 5 things which has changed from last assembly to this assembly. The point number 1 is India has emerged as the global pharmacy. So that role needs to be, very unilaterally said that, look, we have helped the world, 170 odd countries in pandemic. Point number 2, Rishabh, the biggest problem is the world is facing right now, which needs to be called out, because we are going to be at UNSC for next 2 years. So as our vision, expansionism is the number 1 problem world is facing. Without naming China, we can say expansionism is a problem. Point number 2, how do we ensure that, bioterror is not, camouflaged as pandemic? Because that's the point number 2nd concern. It has been already done successfully. Bioterror, camouflage as, pandemic. Point number 3, Rishabh. What happens to the global economic security? Because pandemics of this order and autocratic regimes can bring the whole world to stand still. That's what China has done. So these are the 3 main points which have come up forth as a pharmacy. And here recently, if you recall, the Prime Minister said that the United Nations laws, regulations and all need to be looked into, because he has already indicated that. Because if we go under UNSC, we have to relate these 3 major concerns: expansionism. How do we ensure that the
Sumit Peer, is it a fair logic to what is being explained to me? What is being explained to me is this: that the time right now for the next 6 months is about getting our ducks in a row, right? This is not the point for a counter strike. And I'm not talking about a tactical counter strike on the LAC, that's a separate matter. But for a diplomatic counter strike, we are now aggressively getting our ducks in a row. Whether it be with the Southeast Asian countries, whether it be the European countries, a consensus with the Japanese, the Aussies, a consensus in America, also trying to figure out how this American election pans out. That's going to be an important consequence. That the next few months is about getting our ducks in a row, and then the global move, a coordinated move, a diplomatic move, economic move against China will begin. Is that reasonable, or should we be going for it right now?
I think, Rishabh, we should at least hint out to the world, because this is our opportunity to lay at least our concerns. Getting your allies together and going for the kill is a different issue, but let's lay down the concerns. One more factor which is now baffling the world is red terror, because when these ultra-Islamists get and funded by ultra-leftists, they form a formidable alliance, because this alliance has all the money and power in the world. And if a regime of the world is...
Yes, we already know the Chinese are already started supplying weapons to terrorists operating out of POK. It's already happened. Right. Okay. So it boils down to this. I mean, when it comes to ducks in a row in the UN system, Ambassador Basudhi Mukherjee, what is that can be done? In principle, whether they're actually going to do it or not going to do it, nobody knows. But in principle, the French, the Brits, the Russians, the Americans back you at the UNSC. We have now not only entered the ICJ, which the British gave up their seat so that we could enter. It went to no contest. We've recently won an election for the UNSC, and we won another body election. We are chairman of the WHO. Are there still ducks in a row that need to be put together before we start playing our hand?
Let me first clarify, Rishabh, that the British did not give up their seat.
They knew that they were going to lose. Okay.
We defeated them in a row.
Yeah, there we go.
And when they saw the writing on the wall, they tried to invoke an old rule by which you have a Security Council permanent member mediating, which was turned down. And since they had 3 times lost miserably to India in the General Assembly, they were forced to withdraw under pressure from the US. So it was a very big defeat for them. They did not make way for us. They fought till the end. And yes, you're right. The recent victory for the CSW, where we defeated the Chinese in ASPAC, in the Asia Pacific group, that is extremely, extremely important. And we have in the General Assembly on Security Council reform systematically won every vote. But that is not the issue. The point is that because of the veto power and because of the Chinese, we've not been able to make headway. But yes, I agree with you that there is a momentum now. And that momentum was clear even from the time of our ICJ victory till today. There is a momentum for Security Council reform, and this is the time to push it. And since we are going to be in the Security Council from 1st of January, after a long gap, I may add, this is really the time for us to
Ambassador,
show
I know it's not as simple as black and white of who's with you and who's against you. But in the larger realm of momentum, the Chinese have seen some blowback on their sort of diplomacy, dollar diplomacy of pumping in money and then getting people involved in debt traps. But they still have enormous leverage. Let's not, completely write them off that, they have hammered from all sides. They still have enormous leverage. Even when it came to the vote on Hong Kong, they managed to get 52 countries that voted with them as opposed to 29 who voted against them. Is there a real risk that the Chinese can muscle their way to gain legitimacy for their actions by using the UN?
Actually, let me explain, Rishabh. That Hong Kong is regarded in the UN system by many developing countries as a colonial issue. Hong Kong was used by the British to pump opium into China under colonial times. So it's a very different context. It would be very different if the Chinese, for instance, tried to attack Taiwan. That would be a flashpoint. Or if the Chinese tried to go too far in the South China Sea, that's a flashpoint. Hong Kong is not a flashpoint as far as perception, international perception is concerned. You must keep that in mind, And the second thing is that people have now understood the Chinese design on BRI. That's also very important. You talked about the debt trap. Yes, people now, countries now understand. The Africans understand. So they don't blindly vote
Ma'am, they understand better, but what is, in the middle of the Turks trying to lay claim to a large part of the Aegean Sea, the same Greece is handing over one of its principal ports to what is a BRI initiative, to a Chinese company to construct that port. So
but there's
there
a reason for that, no, Rishabh? The reason is that when the Greeks almost reached Brexit, the EU and the West treated them very shabbily. If the West had been more sympathetic, and if the West had remembered the role of Germany in World War II, in Greek history, they should have been more sensitive. The Greeks had nowhere to go. They were between a rock and a hard place. They were offered money by the Chinese to bail them out, and they accepted. But it doesn't mean that the Greeks don't understand what the Chinese are all about. Huh? The Greeks are very smart people.
Okay, and of course they certainly understand what Turkey is all about, but I'm just trying to boil it down to a real threat. There was a time, not so long ago, early part of this year, General Katoch, when the WHO was telling us, and this was recited in Donald Trump's speech, that A, it's under control, B, no, there's no need to cut down air travel from China, C, no, we're not so sure how communicable this is. And then we found out, to our horror, that a lot of the WHO, what they were saying was not only false, potentially it was motivated and malicious. So a UN body was potentially misused by a power to hoodwink the world. Now, if the Chinese continue this way, they can borrow legitimacy from a global organization to hide their agenda. This is a very serious concern. How do we protect the UN from that happening?
One thing as far as the role of the WHO in the pandemic, I think that must be made very clear, because what the WHO did there, when they made statements that, okay, there is no human contact by which the pandemic can spread and air travel, etc. is safe. At that very same moment, actually there were controls had been placed within China. Now, it is a total disconnect, which certainly indicated that the WHO had been bought out in whichever manner, or the head of the WHO had been bought out. Now, I have a feeling that these things will continue. It will be very difficult to say that we can have an organization which functions in a totally transparent and impartial manner.
Fair enough.
The only thing which needs to be done is that the rest of the members, I think, have to be very careful, and they need to call them out.
Okay.
Now, in this particular case, President Trump has called them out. They have called out the WHO. And I think this needs to be done continuously whenever the world body goes wrong, or any part of it.
But here's the problem. No, but here's the problem, right? They called them out. They've said that we're going to exit, and their formal exit happens July next year. The Chinese then pump in more funding to the WHO. So they de facto take over. The Americans, in fact, almost vacated the field. There's a risk in that.
No, that is true. There is a risk in that. But ultimately, I think when the pressure is put, it is not just the USA which will dim it. If the USA leaves, Britain goes. If Britain goes, you will find Europe also following suit. And then you will find South America going that way. Then South Africa, then India. Then we'll make an alternate body. Yes. I think the stakes for the UN itself are pretty high, and they won't like any dilution on the stakes.
Okay.
I mean, the headquarters is in New York. So the question of China dominating it is true.
Okay. So what is, as we end this year, sir? Now we are end of September, right? We still don't know when a vaccine is coming. It could happen in 2 months, could happen in 6 months. We don't know. What has been the price, General Katoch, that the Chinese have had to pay, other than being called out, having to face public opinion issues in every single country? What's the price they've had to pay? They have maintained the position they took in May of this year on the border. They have kept the islands in the South China Sea. A few of their officials have faced US sanctions, but that's it.
No, I'm afraid China has not been made to pay a price. That is a fact. Not only have they not been made to pay a price, I think they're going to make a profit out of this whole system. You see, if the vaccine comes out and the Chinese are going to give it, you will have countries like Pakistan within South Asia. Both Pakistan and Bangladesh will be one of the strongest customers, and they will do it by force. There will be pressure applied by China onto these countries.
Yeah.
And then you will find it going to Africa and to other countries too. So I think China is going to make a profit out of the whole system. But that having been said, I think there are other people also in the vaccine market. India will be a major player also in the vaccine market. So will Russia and so will others. And whichever way it is, China hasn't paid a price.
Okay.
Can we make China pay a price?
Okay, so for
I think that would
countries,
be the
okay, there are
million-dollar
going to be two
question.
things. One is just real leverage, right? Where one is all aspirational and free world and democracy. That's all aspirational. Okay, the Americans have backed all sorts of dictatorships. You have to look across the border in Pakistan to know that. But Preeti Opala, there is real leverage, right? Right now, what is the real leverage that we have in India that is actually going to say that there has to be a price that the Chinese now pay for the actions they take? A commensurate reciprocal price.
But I think one thing that we've all learned post-COVID is that we don't want a world run by China, and which pushes actually India up in its place. It finds itself in a geopolitical sweet spot in a way. I think the leverage that India has is actually, ironically, with its alliances and with its strong alliance with the US. I think both of them need to come together at this point and get firm.
No, but what do you mean by come together means what? We've been talking here that, there now needs to be a formal Indo-Pacific charter. We've been talking about the Quad. Coming together means what?
Well, I mean, the Quad needs to be strengthened. But I look, a lot of this also depends on these upcoming elections, because I think one party is going to be much more favorable to the Indian story than the other. We know that. So we just fingers crossed the right person wins so that all of this can just
Preeti,
go
can you just, since you
now.
mentioned it, can you help our viewers understand, this very strange paradox? Because many of us have family in the US or know somebody studying there or living there or green card holders. For immigrants, the Democrats are always considered a better option than conservative Republicans. But when it comes to the relationship with India, it's the George Bushes of the world that were far more important, went on a limb with the Indo-US nuclear deal compared to a Clinton or Obama. Why does this paradox exist?
Yeah, I think it's the dynamic has definitely shifted. Certainly in this particular election, with this current administration, they have been very supportive, backed India on all of its geopolitical activities, whether it's Kashmir, it's the CAA, the NRC, or it's border conflicts or whatnot. It's completely backed India. The military has, the administration has, the army has. So that's very important. Whereas you look at the Democrats and you just look at the narratives coming out, they are extremely antagonistic with the major ally. And at the same time, they're not calling out rogue actors like Pakistan for not just what they're doing in Afghanistan, but just everything else that they're involved in. And I really fear, I think the Indian diaspora over here needs to wisen up and really understand.
Yeah, it is paradoxical because if you're a first generation or second generation immigrant or a migrant to the US, you think the Democrats are what you want to vote for, and you think Trump can be borderline racist. But on the other hand, when it comes to relationship with India, Trump seems to be the way to go. It's it is paradoxical. Sumit Peer, let's just boil it down. We've got a few minutes left before the Prime Minister starts speaking. If we are talking about getting our ducks in a row, India is on the cusp of being more than a great power. In the end, it's going to boil down to our economic might and capacity. And let's face it, the Chinese have a GDP, 4-5 times ours. The Americans still have a GDP 10 times ours. Okay, so we've got ways to go. Maybe 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30, maybe more. But all my life, since I was in school, we were dealing with the Chinese playing the game in our backyard. Whether every time we talked about string of pearls, I did my undergraduate research thesis on this, my master's research thesis on this, that in Bangladesh, in Maldives, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, now in Nepal. We've seen them playing this game for 20 years. How do we play the game back with them? So when we are saying we're putting in our ducks in a row for 2021, what are we doing in Taiwan? What are we doing in Japan? What are we doing in Southeast Asia? What should we be doing?
I think, Rishabh, under the current dispensation of Modi ji, it has already begun. The way we stopped them in Ladakh, the way we are talking about Quad, the way we are doing the joint exercises, these are very tangible steps what we are doing. So a couple of things what we can do, Rishabh. We should seriously contemplate joining NATO. That is a formidable option which is always with us. Quad should be made as a military alliance and ASAP as a ASUD. And the world is getting bipolar. There's a Chinese camp and there's an American camp. We cannot waste our time being non-aligned. We have already wasted 4 decades playing that non-aligned movement and young Turks and all that. time is to align to the kind of powers which are like us, like the oldest democracy and the largest together. Because if you make a formidable alliance, then if Republicans or Democrats come, a lot cannot be changed once the alliance is cemented. So we have to align with the right set of people, Australia, Japan, and as for the Asian dominance.
But Sumit, are there takers or should there be takers for the argument that the Chinese are now building? That the China is not the problem, it's American meddling that's the problem. It's the Americans who are turning India against China, it's the Americans who are blowing this border dispute out of promotion. There'll be takers for that.
No, you see, Rishabh, it's not about China. I mean, it's not America, let's face it. It is the China, it is the expansionism of China. It is Xi Jinping who is responsible for that because he's desperate for victory. American President Donald Trump has helped us as and when we wanted. And they have always given us critical support. When has America tangibly acted against Indian wills? No, we don't have a border with the US. We don't have to worry about them. We have a border with China, which is a problem. And Chinese problem will be persistent unless and unless we are seen as powerful.
I have this endemic fear, and the fear remains. I was having Ambassador Mukherjee a conversation a year or so ago with an American journalist living here in India, and asked him a simple question that why when a terror attack happens in Kashmir you call it a militant attack, and I got a whole winded explanation that when a military target is attacked then it's a militant attack, but when a civilian target is attacked it's not it's a terrorist attack. So my question was, so you're saying on 9/11 the Twin Towers was a terrorist attack, but the attack on the Pentagon was a militant attack. They're two different things by your own definition. The reality is that there are many people in America who, before this pandemic, were running a vitriolic campaign against India, against Narendra Modi, calling him a fascist. Every article that was printed said, Hindu fundamentalist BJP. These guys are still there. They don't seem to want to call out China as aggressively. These kind of agencies, people, groups, subgroups still do exist.
That is why, Rishabh, I would like to underline that the liberal left in America, which has now moved center space in the Democratic Party, is fundamentally anti-Indian, be it human rights or be it our national security interests. This group, which has become very powerful, we cannot be controlled either by Joe Biden or by Kamala Harris, who calls herself a black woman. So the Indian diaspora, of course, has a role to play in the vote and in the victory or otherwise of Donald Trump.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.